Have you fallen into an open manhole recently? Do you find yourself in the company of strangers? Well, then you might very well be in the feature Underground. In spite of everything, my name is Hunter Lanier, and I am here today with a review of the upcoming, highly anticipated, original horror film, Weapons. The film is directed by Zach Cregger, coming off of his first horror film, the fun, but I would argue mostly forgettable, Barbarian. Now, needless to say, Weapons is a movie that is predicated on a mystery. So I will be giving away no plot details whatsoever in this review. As the kids say, it is spoiler free. Oh, and before I start the review in earnest, I did want to do some show and tell. I got this at the movie. They gave me a poster, and they gave me this potato peeler, which will become more well known to you after you see the movie. The potato peeler also has a recipe for chicken soup. Again, something that will become more relevant after you watch the movie. I also have these scratch and sniff blueberry pies from Heretic. I have a lot of this stuff they hand out at these press screenings. As the channel grows, I may do some giveaways with this stuff, so I encourage you to tell your friends about the channel. Please do. The first thing I want to talk about is something that surprised me, which is that the tone of Weapons is much lighter than what I had anticipated. Given the premise and the upgrade in dramatic actors, I thought that maybe Weapons was Cregger moving away from the goofiness of Barbarian into a horror film that was more operatic, more intense, more thought-provoking. Now, it is a small step in that direction, but Weapons is, for the most part, like Barbarian before it, a horror comedy good time. Now, for many of you out there, that's good news. For me, although I enjoyed what I got, I was hoping for something a little more emotionally provocative. On the positive side, I do think Cregger has a more elevated understanding of that particular comedy horror dynamic this time around. I think I've talked before about how that particular combination complements each other because they're each so distinct. The comedy serves as a kind of pressure reliever because as the film tightens and tightens the tension, and then ultimately the tension culminates with the film cracking a smile, the audience at that point is so relieved that they become comedy pushovers. It becomes very easy to get a hard laugh out of the audience after you've just spent 5 minutes driving them crazy. There's a line early on in the film by Josh Brolin that comes after this nightmarish sequence that is the perfect example of this. Likewise, after the film lures you into a jolly mood, it creates a more jarring contrast when things once again get dark. In short, the tension makes the movie funnier, and the comedy makes the movie more tense. But only if they're both done well, as they are here, or else they would distract from one another. One of the biggest reasons this comedy-horror dynamic works so well in Weapons is the characters. Almost everything good about movies ultimately comes down to the characters working. These characters are great illustrations of small-town personalities, each feeling fully developed and protagonists in their own stories. As you spend time with each of them, it's almost like you're watching different movies. And it's actually a pretty cool spin on the oversaturated Rashomon concept. The difference being that you're not necessarily getting different versions of the truth through each perspective, but rather the film uses the different perspectives as a tension-building tool to push the story a little further each time, really stretching out the mystery and leaving you with these mid-movie cliffhangers. And this inching forward of the story isn't nearly as frustrating as it could have been because the characters are so rich. You want to spend time with them just as much as you want to know what happens next in the plot. That is, except for one of the characters, whose segment kicks off this part of the movie, really the only part of the movie that I don't think works very well. It's when the mystery starts to become less of a mystery, and I simply didn't find the revelations very interesting or satisfying. For reasons I have already touched on, but will leave ambiguous as it may hint toward the direction of the story. As it may be clear to you by now, I do think Weapons has a lot going for it. It has great actors, it has great characters, it has great writing, it has some great visual elements, and at times it is very funny. But it is missing something that prevents it from being a horror classic. Part of that void is the lack of originality. Now, the movie does make some half-hearted attempts to subvert horror movie tropes. There is a character in the movie whose design is very obviously meant to provoke a very familiar nightmare. But aside from its unique, incremental story structure, which I loved, the movie doesn't stray too far from the tried and true. Even the environment and atmosphere is very evocative of 80s suburbia, a common backdrop to many popular horror films, as well as Stephen King. Those similarities aren't a big deal. Even I get a tinge of nostalgia when I see a dad with a mustache in a plaid shirt mowing his lawn. But I think it's a symptom of Cregger maybe being a little too content with making his version of something and not his own new thing. Or at the very least, not doing enough with the old thing to make it feel new. Because it's a horror film, I suppose I should touch on whether or not I thought it was scary. I did not personally find the movie to be very scary. The horror elements of the movie largely come from jump scares, tension, eerie visuals, the usual stuff. There is some gore, but not too much. I would say the movie uses violence in a frugal way, trying to maximize those moments rather than just making the movie nonstop violent. We're all scared of different things, but when I think of my favorite horror movies, well, first of all, when I think of my favorite horror movies, most of them are on the more campy side. But when I think of my favorite horror movies that genuinely scare me, or did scare me when I first saw them, I think of movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. These are movies where the scares and the horror comes from something deeper than what's on screen. There's an underlying idea or notion or concept that's disturbing and bothersome, but also interesting, which is what makes the movies good and not just unpleasant, in which case there would be no reason to revisit them unless you're just into torturing yourself. The scares and Weapons don't go this deep, even though they could, given the very real world scenarios of missing children and school tragedies, which is kind of what, going back to the beginning of this review, kind of what I thought we were going to get, which is a horror movie allegory of a very real world type of horror. But again, the movie opts for a lighter tone, which is not a net negative, it's just a trade-off. You get that great dynamic of comedy and tension, but you lose that indelible feeling of horror that requires a certain, a critical mass of attention from the filmmakers to achieve. If it were Peter Falk and Diane Keaton in Rosemary's Baby instead of Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, and the movie was broken up with quirky dates and funny marital bickering, well, Rosemary's Baby would be a very different movie. And still probably a very good one, but very different. One small thing I did want to mention, and it's something that is in the trailers. It is single-handedly the most memorable visual element in the movie. And that is the very practical looking bug eyes. Of the million little decisions that go into making a movie, this is arguably the very best decision that Cregger makes. It's easily the most memorable visual element in the movie, far more so than the goofy anime run, which I think has something to do with a triangle, which ties into other stuff. I don't know. Well, those are all my thoughts on Weapons. Now is the time for you to let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. Next up, I will be seeing Spike Lee's Highest to Lowest. I will be seeing that on Thursday, and I will have that review out as early as I can next week. To prepare you for that one, I highly encourage you to go watch my review of the original Kurosawa movie, High and Low, which is on the channel if you have not seen that already. I'll put a link somewhere up there. Until then, I leave you with the always comforting reminder that every day underground is a good day.